welcome to another episode of the Trailblazers Experience Podcast, the podcast that showcases the career journeys of amazing women across various sectors. And this is actually season 3, the launch of season 3. And my guest today is the amazing Bianca Bass. How are you doing today? Good morning.
I'm really well, thank you. Good morning. Great to be here.
I think a great way to start the season, because your journey has been amazing, has been awesome. You describe yourself as a brand marketer who's gone now to the boardroom in terms of board advisor. Should we just circle back and just talk about your journey and how this all started? Because I think there's so many women out there currently thinking, how do I sidestep into a different trajectory of my career? And I think it's always interesting to know the early years of what makes you tick and what made you go in a specific direction.
Yeah, I would love to. And I always think that there's so much richness and so many learnings from those early years. And whenever I feel that my career is going a little bit in a direction that doesn't feel true to me, I go back to those early years and those really early dreams that I had. So yes, very happy to start there. So I grew up always loving writing. I was a passionate writer. In my spare time, I would create magazines on a very early version of Microsoft Word. My first magazine was called Heroine with an E. And I really just loved telling these feminist stories from the playground and from my mum's friends, and was always just a very naturally curious person. And when I went to university, I thought I really want to be a journalist. That was my dream. And we're looking at the recession, 2008 recession. And I moved to London and started doing unpaid magazine internships. The first year, it was all really unheard of titles. And I was just trying to get as many experiences as I could. But I worked my way up and got to my dream, which was British Vogue. And what an incredible experience it was. It was at the time that Vogue were launching their first ever Vogue festival. And I got an understanding not only of the fashion industry, but of the more commercial side of what it takes to promote an event, what marketing means. And it was at that point that I had a bit of a decision to make, because I was graduating in the depths of the recession. I felt that as much as I loved the industry, being completely candid, I couldn't afford to live in London on what those roles were paying. And so I was asked to stay on at Vogue, but it just wasn't feasible for me, given what they were able to pay. And there's a great deal of privilege in the magazine and the publishing and the journalism space, which going into it, I wasn't aware of. I still, to this day, adore the industry. I love magazines. I love editorial. But I had to pivot a little bit quite quickly when I realized this isn't going to quite work for me. So
do you think it was a bit of a dream crusher, because you had all these visions of working there, but then what wasn't marrying up was the dream, the passion, with the remuneration and the compensation?
Yeah, exactly that. And that was quite a painful lesson to learn early on. And I think if I reflect back, that was quite a defining moment in how I've approached my career subsequently. I also had an experience where I had an internship in New York at Nylon magazine, which was another dream of mine. That was another reality check / dream crusher in a healthy way, because New York is harsh. I had no money.
And more expensive than London. Yeah.
Exactly that. It was really expensive. And I just went into it completely naive. And I think that level of naivety can be helpful when you're going after these really bold, out there dreams. But yes, I learned a lot very, very quickly. And coming back, graduating, I realized I need to do something else. I didn't want to lose the essence of what I loved, which was writing. And at that time, I was very much into fashion and the creative industries. So somebody mentioned to me, if you want to make a bit more money, you could get into copywriting. And I remember not actually knowing what that was. I thought, copywriting, is that something to do with like trademark law? I had no idea.
You were thinking on the other. And actually, Bianca, there's also a lot of money in copyright law, by the way. So either or, lots of money.
I wasn't quite qualified yet, but I was willing to do whatever it took. So
yeah.
Yes, I remember for the first few weeks after graduating, it was a real, just difficult time. I was working in a call center, promoting solar panels, and another call center doing these government surveys, and just thinking, I am so incredibly lost. And then I got an opportunity to start my career at John Lewis, where I was a copywriter. I then moved to Selfridges and other well-known brands, all household names at that time. And I was really just, if my family have heard of the company, I will go work there. And that was my metric of success. Where things really changed.
Established business, yeah.
Yes, an established business. We're doing great. But where things really changed for me was when I got an opportunity to join TripAdvisor. So they approached me, and it was for a role in Oxford. I lived in London, and the role was a copy manager role, managing their small copywriting team. And I was 23, and I remember the recruiter saying, "You are quite young for this role." And I thought, well, I'll just go for the interview. And that was always my mantra, and it has been ever since. Always take the conversation. You never know where it's going to take you. At the very least, you'll learn something new about a new person, you'll make a new connection, you'll learn something about an industry, or you might have an opportunity. So I took...
Always take the meeting, isn't it? Always take the meeting. Yeah.
Always take the meeting, and always try and be proactive in booking in other meetings with people, even when you are happy in a role, just to keep that muscle going. So got to TripAdvisor, was very fortunate to get a job offer. It was a big step up for me. With a minor caveat, it was in Oxford. And so I bought a car for the role, and I drove there every day and back, because I knew that for me to get a managerial position in London, it wouldn't have happened. The reason that I was given that opportunity so young was because I took a risk. And it was stressful and difficult and tiring, but it was also the moment that my career changed. And that's when I started learning.
That's interesting, Bianca. So there are two key takeaways that I'm just hearing from there. I think for the audience that's listening is sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone to progress your career. Fashion, magazine, really sexy, and then retail, really sexy for a lot of people. And so I'm going to take a side step, get out of London, and two, work for TripAdvisor. And so I think the fact that you said, you know what, I may have to commute an hour and a half or more. It's outside of my comfort zone, but this is a managerial position and will get me on that trajectory for growth.
That was exactly my mindset. A few people in my life thought that I was pretty out there for doing that, but I had this very strong trust that this opportunity was going to open up doors for me that would otherwise be closed. And to your point about moving away from a sexy industry, yes, that was exactly how I felt. But when I was working in fashion cupboards as an unpaid intern, when I was initially working in retail, I was writing about and surrounded by things that I could not ever see myself being able to afford. And that was a kind of special kind of torture in a way, because it was everywhere. I also, as a student, worked on the shop floor at Selfridges, selling very, very, very expensive shoes. So I had a very interesting and kind of, I don't know the right word for it, but I was exposed to a lot of wealth very early on in my time in London. And I think that that made me feel less than in many ways, if we're talking about class and just the fact that I didn't come from that kind of background. And then suddenly it was everywhere all around me. And it definitely shaped the decisions I made. So when I had the opportunity at TripAdvisor, I thought this is a route to a different kind of life. Yes, to your point, it's a risk and it's tough, but it ultimately paid off. And so I joined, I got to lead my first ever team. And that's when I learned strengths really lie. And at times, again, it was very difficult because I was managing people who are older than me. And I was very self-conscious about that fact. So I was very much in my head about managing people that were older. But as my time at TripAdvisor went on, I had this real sense of, I have a gift in asking good questions, helping people when it comes to their career objectives. And I really enjoy doing this. So that for me opened up the whole next phase of my career, which was really a focus on leading teams and ultimately working with people. And I think going back to my initial objectives, which was journalism and writing and really basing that on curiosity, so much of good leadership is about being curious. It's about not just giving people answers. People don't want answers. They want to be asked the right questions to lead them to the answers. So after TripAdvisor, I was there for about 2 years. I was a very young senior manager. I got promoted, loved it, could have stayed there, could have been very comfortable. But I was about 25 and I thought, I could either go and do an MBA and learn more about business because it's a massive organization and I was working on one siloed part of it. And I was getting a little bit frustrated because I didn't know what the business impact of myself and my team's work was. So, MBA, or do I join the startup world? And I chose to join the startup world, which I think was definitely the right decision for me. And joined a company called
Talk
Labs,
me
which,
through that because
yeah,
you were at TripAdvisor, which is a digital business. So it was sort of your first foray into
tech.
digital
Yeah.
tech. And like you said, you were actually interested in the numbers and the metrics and, wanting to know what impact does my role have on the business. How do you then suddenly pivot and say, okay, I'm going to join the startup world? What is the decision making process? Because I know a lot of people actually, with everything we're seeing on social media and lots of, YouTubers, Dragon's Den, Shark Tank, seeing how businesses have grown and, 10x themselves in terms of revenue. What then makes you think, you know what, I think I could add value to some startup out there? How does that come about?
So I was looking at it from the perspective of whenever I've followed my curiosity, I've never gone wrong. Things may have been difficult at times. I may have gone to the wrong environment or the wrong culture, but providing I'm following that deep curiosity within me, it always seems to work out. And at that point, we were doing a lot of email marketing campaigns and brand led campaigns and events. And the actual quantifiable success of those was not made available to us. And it was kind of the mindset of you keep doing what you're doing great. We on this side over here focus on that. And I didn't like that because I wanted to know the end to end impact that I'd had. It was really important to me, motivation wise. And I had felt really comfortable at that point. And leading a brand and content team. To go to that next level, I needed to know about marketing. And I also saw, and again, going back to how I was shaped by my early experiences, again, I could see a ceiling for my earning potential, which was
Mm.
that if I stay in brand and content, I will be able to have a good career and I will be able to really work with brilliant people and do fantastic things for brands that I really admire and respect. But if I want to go to that next level, and I'm talking financial objectives as well, I
Mm.
need to get into marketing. And that's not going to happen in this big organization because of the way that we work in silos. So I knew as well, the only way that I'd be able to pivot to be in marketing and to get that title was to work for a startup where I was the first marketeer and then I'd build it from there. I didn't know exactly how it pan out, but I knew I'm interested in sales. I did a lot of selling when I was part-time working as a teenager and I loved aspects of it, hated other aspects, but I knew that I had that skill. And it was just a huge risk. And I do remember telling people that I worked with at TripAdvisor that I really loved and respected. I'm going to do this head of marketing role for this company. It's unknown. I'm going to be joining a building site and it's myself and the team's job to turn it into a brand, into a business. And again, it was one of those defining moments where I thought, I have to do this. I'm 25. I've got time on my side, but I also have a sense of urgency and wanting to learn new things. What's the worst that can happen? And from there onwards, I've been working in the startup and scale up space. So for the first few years of that phase of my career, I was very much working in early stage startups, launching, helping raise investment rounds, developing brands from scratch. And then when it came to moving again into the fintech space, that was really happenstance. It was an opportunity that I didn't seek out necessarily, but that when I met with the company, I felt, yeah, there's synergy here. I could do something. And you asked me about how I knew there'd be value that I could add. And this is
Mm.
one of the things that I really want to stress and just make a strong point of. We have to be really, really clear on what our brand of value adding is. And I knew that the way that I stand out is that up until that point, and onwards in my career, I've been very industry agnostic. And that has
Mm.
helped me because whenever I come to a new project, I'm looking at it from many different angles. I'm not looking at it from, well, yes, I've worked in tech my whole career. I came to that role from a fashion and retail background. Then when I'm looking at joining the fintech space, I was coming at it from a consumer startup background. And I wonder if you've also had that with the Ned position that you've been telling me about, because when you come to a new industry, the fintech space, for example, from retail, I think there's so much power in that because you're not coming at it with certain limitations. And I do think that has been the key to the success that I've had when I have pivoted each time, because I don't have the same way of viewing things. And I'm looking at it really from the consumer lens rather than from an industry lens. And that's been incredibly helpful.
I totally agree with being industry agnostic if you really want to accelerate in your career, because otherwise you're just going to put yourself in a box. And that's
Yes.
sort of even for myself in my careers, starting off in retail, I wasn't, akin to, once I knew that this industries didn't pay really well unless you're at the top. And, there's so many people crowding for that space. Actually, if you look at it holistically and say that helicopter view and say, right, what's my value add? Someone quoted, I was listening to a podcast about the music industry and the business of music and
Mhm.
talking about how there are two types of equity in terms of value. There's sweat equity in terms of you're adding your skill set, your knowledge, what you're bringing to the table. And then the other equity is obviously the cash investment that you're looking for, that sweat equity, that person who's worked in those categories, worked in those industries, and can add value to help them grow their business. And once you hit that nail on the head, so sort of why I find the Ned roles really interesting, and I want to build on that. If I think I want to future proof my career, what does the next 15, 10 years look like or more? I enjoy that. And it doesn't matter whether it's AI, whether it's fintech, it could be the health industry, it could be MarTech, any of the tech industries, saying, right, how can I bring my skill set? Doesn't matter where I've worked, what's my value add, I think is a big lesson. And you've learned it early on. I mean, that's pretty amazing though, Bianca.
No, thank you. And I really resonate with everything you've just said about what is that value add and being really strong in the fact that no one coming to that role has had the experiences that you've had. And I didn't necessarily know that. I had a lot of self doubt and a lot of imposter syndrome, quote unquote. And then over the years, I've realized more and more just through being able to get, if I'm to psychoanalyze myself a little bit, maybe I really needed the quantifiable, measurable proof that my work really was making a difference. And once I had
Mm.
that, it was fact. It wasn't feeling, it was just cold, hard fact. This is evidence that I am able to go in, I'm able to grow a business, I'm able to build a really successful brand, and this is how much revenue we've made, or whatever the metric is. And so, yes, going back to your point, I really think that key takeaway from this conversation already, know the value that you add and be really clear on that. And every conversation you go into, every interview you go into, every board meeting you go into, remember, I am here because I have a collection of experiences that nobody else around this table does. And I look at things with a whole different vision. And yeah, I think at this point in my career, I have enough evidence to start to believe that. But gathering those data points as well has been very helpful for me. So whenever I do have moments of self-doubt, on my phone, in an iPhone note, just everything that I can just look at and say, you've done really well. You're good. Like you've achieved a lot.
Yeah.
You're absolutely
And you
fine.
have to remind yourself of that from time to time because, you
Yeah.
know, a, as a woman as well. So you're circling in this startup space where
Hmm.
probably there are not lots of women as well, and also the industries that you decided to pivot into. Talk to me about some of the challenges that you've had and how you've overcome them as a woman.
I think particularly in fintech, that's been very true and very pertinent. So I have always looked at any role that I've been in, particularly a leadership role, with a great deal of responsibility. And that isn't that it's my responsibility to solve all of the company culture problems that we know exist. I know that I can't do that. It's bigger than me and it's bigger than any one person. But I have looked at it as a great privilege to be able to be in rooms that otherwise wouldn't have had a woman in or wouldn't have had a perspective like mine in. So, yes, I have had some difficult experiences with men in the workplace. I think any woman who has had a career can relate to that and knows exactly what I'm talking about without going into details. And I know that you'll have your stories too. And I hate that for us. And so when I see the generation that are now coming up into the workplace, if there are women like you, women like me there that they can see, I take that very seriously, because I didn't have many role models when I started my career, especially not in some of the, as you say, the more male dominated industries. I didn't have an example. I didn't come from a family where that had been the story, and so I feel really proud and privileged and honored to be able to write a new kind of story. I definitely think that it took me some time, confidence
Mhm.
wise, when it came to speaking up in meetings. So I grew up very, very shy. I felt hugely terrified of speaking in some of the big, especially when I worked for TripAdvisor, big American meetings, lots of very like privileged energy in that room. And I remember having little challenges with myself. So I would say, you have to say one thing in this meeting. And it doesn't have to be a huge thing, but you have to say one thing. Start there. It's a meeting of a couple of women, a load of men. You have to say, just ask a question. If you don't have a comment, ask a question. And over the years, I've really kind of gamified it actually, and said to myself, okay, in this meeting, I think that you should challenge yourself to actually, if you disagree, respectfully disagree. Make a comment that just says, you know what, I actually view it this way. And so a lot of experimentation, a lot of building up that neuroplasticity to say, you have a voice, you can use it, you are continually using it. And when you do use it, you add a whole new perspective that this business really needs. And so, yes, it's been a challenge at times. I view it as a big responsibility. I view it as a privilege. I'm excited for the generations that are coming up to have less of that to deal with. And if I can play a really small part in being an example for somebody or creating an opportunity for somebody and then showing them that there's a different way to lead as well, then that brings a huge amount of meaning to me in my career.
I think that's so important. I don't know if you've ever read the book by Sheryl Sandberg called Lean In, and she's talking about
Yes.
how you deserve a seat at the table. And when you are at the table, sit there and be present, contribute, ask questions, be an active listener, because that's how you learn. Think about what your point of view is. And obviously, if you're asking a question, is how will it add value to the conversation? One thing about that value add. And also, if you're a trailblazer, the first one in the room, remember you are breaking those barriers for the rest to come through and finding your allies. My dad always said to me that wherever you go, obviously there will be more men in the room, but
Mm-hmm.
find your allies. And I must say, Bianca, I have lots of male allies who've helped me with my career, who've given me advice. And if you ask them, they're so honest and open, and they will show you the ropes. So if you don't ask, you don't get as well. I think it's important to acknowledge as well to help you on that trajectory as a woman in the industry.
And I think we're all people trying to do our best. Most people, of course, there are people that you meet in the workplace that you're like, oh God, no, no. But most people are good at their core. And for some of the old timer men that I've worked with, they're trying to figure out this new way of working and new people coming into the workplace. And so, yeah, I think making those allies is so important. A closed mouth doesn't get fed.
Oh,
That
yeah.
is one of
And
my favorite.
Bianca, it's actually an interesting time now because I think about the different industrial revolutions that have happened, and tech has been a major one. But
Yeah.
now there's sort of this other, revolution that's happening, whether it's AI, the evolution of technology itself, the evolution of the workspace, the evolution of how we communicate, how we interact. So this is a good time to actually be one of the people who are making a difference on our, step changing, because the guys in the room who've been around years, they also have never navigated through this time before.
I so love that. And I think about that a lot at the moment, particularly at a time of such increasing polarization, where all the powers that be want us to be against each other. They want us to be, in really siloed communities. And we have to lean in to embracing the people that have been in the business for 30 years as well and bring them closer, because we need their knowledge in the same way that they need ours. And I think that that's where the most successful businesses really exist, when they have true diversity of thought. We need those different lived experiences around the table. And yeah, going back to the point about how does it feel to be the only woman in those environments? How does it feel And how has that experience been for me in a lot of male dominated environments? Something that I've taken a great deal of strength from has been the Dr. Maya Angelou quote, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And that has really stayed with me. My mum is from Brazil. My entire female lineage is Brazilian. And I think about the opportunities that I've been able to have compared to what they had. And they're always with me. They're always with me. Wherever I go, I just think I'm walking into this room as one, but I do come as 10,000. And the fact that society has a long way to go still, but that we've progressed enough that I'm able to be in this room and I'm able to earn great money and I'm able to really use my voice and actually be heard. Okay, that's progress. We're on the right path. And so, yeah, I do view it as we're building a new kind of future, and our roles as women who are afforded these opportunities is to help push that further.
Exactly. Standing on the ancestors and the battles that they fought before us to bring us to this point. Let's talk about the role of you as a board advisor, because I feel everything that you've done in your career, and you're talking about being confident in the boardroom and being a voice, those call center days, do you know that they actually helped you? I know many people started off in a call center and keeping people, first of all, on the phone, making sure they don't hang up, and then actually selling them something. That is an important soft skill that you're using wherever you go.
You are so right. I didn't know it at the time, but you are so, so right. And I think there are few harder jobs in the world than trying to get people to stay on the phone listening to solar panels. And
Yes.
Been there, done that. And this is before climate change was even in the public consciousness. So it really was just such an inconvenience, anyone that picked up the phone to me. But yes, it did help a lot. And I think, again, building up confidence, and you just have this memory bank that you can go back to when times are hard and say, yeah, but you overcame this, 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 and this. And you will be able to do the same with this new situation. So yeah, thank you for saying that. I love that. And one of my hiring strategies has always been to ask people, tell me about the jobs you did when you were a teenager. Tell me about your non-career jobs. Yeah, I want to know. And when somebody says that they haven't had some of those early experiences, that can be a slight concern for me, because I think they do make you, and I think it shows a certain amount of work ethic and drive, and just also, I love people who have a real eclectic set of experiences that come together and make them who they are in a really well-rounded way. So yes, love the call center point.
Also ask about if someone's been involved in sports for a very long time, that, speaks to discipline and consistency and teamwork. That also helps as well in terms of hiring strategy, what their extracurricular activities are.
Yes, just anything that was really important to them or that shaped who they are early on, because there's so much there. And I love the question. This is more of a journaling and self-reflection question. Who were you before the world changed you?
Yes. Wow. Before the world changed you, before you got into the rat race, I think.
Before you got into the rat race, before the world and its conditioning and career and, those financial objectives set in, who were you? What were you most curious about, most passionate about? Where did your mind go and your attention and focus go when there weren't all of those external pressures? And so I love that as a question too.
That's a very good question. Have you been able to answer that for yourself?
Some days yes, some days no. I can answer it thematically. I can pull out certain themes and say, okay, writing has been this one constant for me. So when I feel really removed from myself, it's probably because I haven't journaled for a while, or I haven't read a really good book in a while. I haven't embraced that more culturally curious side of myself. So you can find themes that are almost a compass back to yourself when life does get a little bit too much. I definitely think that we evolve as people. So parts of who you were then isn't going to be as applicable now. But yeah, thematically, yes, I think it helps.
So let's talk about you being a board advisor and now the role of, guiding companies strategically and advising organizations on business and strategy. What drew you to the role, and what has that been in terms of experience for you?
So my first board position I fell into unexpectedly. I joined a company called 3S Money. It was a fintech startup at that point. I'm focusing on international business accounts and helping particularly non-resident directors launch in new markets and get access to banking infrastructure. And I remember joining that role, and I had been in fintech when I was younger in the B2C side. This was a pure B2B play. And I really came at it from, again, total fresh pair of eyes. And I looked at what they were doing, I looked at the language they were using, and I thought, this is not at all inclusive, despite your mission as a company being to
Mm.
promote financial inclusivity. Yeah, there was a lot of jargon, the brand just wasn't at all welcoming. And so the first 6 months of that role, working myself and a marketing executive, very small team, was just to start building up that brand. And we built also the very beginnings of an inbound marketing strategy using a blend of multi-channel approach, PPC, some SEO, and lots of other marketing acronyms that I won't bore the audience with. But essentially, the task in hand was, how do we build an audience and a brand for a company that historically hasn't really focused on that and hasn't had a marketing
Mm.
as a priority? And that was, in terms of my competitive edge, I didn't come from the industry. I looked at it and I thought, you see it this way. I look at it from the consumer's perspective. And there are all these ways we can improve it. And, over the course of just under 2 years, ended up building a really successful brand, built up the marketing team. And I think because I, at that point in my career, had a relative amount of confidence to challenge and to bring my suggestions, the CEO, and I was really fortunate to be in this position, invited me to join the company's board. And
Mm.
I didn't see it coming. I thought that my path into board experience would always be as a non-executive director. I didn't think I would be company director and executive director, but the way it was going, I think I was a voice around the table that added something different. And I was working really well with the CEO. We were very much in collaboration and challenging each other as well and bringing new ideas. And I was enjoying it so much. And so the role, I think, in their view was a natural extension of what I'd already been doing, because I wasn't just focusing on marketing. I cared about the end-to-end customer experience. I cared about the whole commercial objectives. And that was a business that, 3S Money are absolutely fantastic at being very focused on their metrics. They know where they're at any given point, every day, every hour. They're obsessive about data. And that was exactly what I was craving way back when I worked at TripAdvisor. So it was really a fantastic fit for me at that point in many ways. And so get invited onto the board, regulated company, so lots of considerations. Was also
Mm.
very lucky because one of their former Neds trained me for a few months on everything that being a board member entails. And he's very experienced, a complete industry veteran, and he helped me so much with understanding what my responsibility was to the shareholders, also to the employees, and how to challenge if I wasn't sure in a board meeting or I had particular questions. So that was my original path into it. And then alongside that, I have always been what I'd call consulting. So working with startups, helping them just figure out brand strategy or growth strategy using what I learn in my day job and then applying it to smaller businesses. But yes, in recent months, I've now been focusing on, okay, board advisor positions. What does that look like? I'm about to start working with a sustainable fashion company, which goes back to my original interest, a bit of a full circle moment now that I'm
Full
in a position
circle,
where I
isn't
really,
it? Yeah.
yeah, it is. And so I think for me, what I love about it is that as somebody who has had a bit of a portfolio career and has done lots of different things and different industries, I like being able to add value in a concentrated amount of time. I
Mm.
like being able to go in and saying, this is what I see. And this is the opportunity that I've got this idea. I've got this opportunity for us. I see this challenge. And for me, it all goes back to people, all of it. The thing that I've loved the most in my career is that golden thread of curiosity. It's that building relationships and ultimately understanding different types of founders and how best to work with them. So I'm very excited about it. But yes, that was how I got to my first board position. Unexpected, such a valuable experience. And I learned a huge amount about how a company is run, how to build a company. 3S Money went through stratospheric growth. absolutely huge growth. When I joined, we were about 30 employees. By the time I left, we were about 200. That's in just under 2 years. That's a lot of growth. There was a lot of learnings and yeah, invaluable experience. And I'm just so looking forward to in this next phase of my career, bringing a lot of those lessons to smaller companies because I love the go-to-market phase. I love just problem solving and I love seeing companies take off. So yes, that's a little bit about it. And I'd really love to hear about your experience as well, coming to your NED position. I don't know how much you've spoken about it on the podcast, but I'd love to hear more.
I think I always looked at when you're growing up, you always want to say, I want to work for the businesses that my parents actually know about and they've
Yep.
heard about. But the problem is, like you said, really good organizations that I've seen, and I started off my career in Germany, really good organizations, people stay there and they stay in those roles and they stay there for a very
Yeah.
long time. So if there is a role that you're aspiring to, you either have to wait for that person to retire or you're waiting next in line for four other people. And I said to myself, I said, if I really want to grow my career, to your point, I have to look for the obscure or unknown brands or the brands or businesses that are smaller and how I can, value add in terms of thinking about my whole omni-channel experience and growth and business development and that commercial side. And I think even as I thought about NED and board roles, I said, well, I've got a hit list in my head of 10 businesses I'd love to sit on a board for, but it feels like there's so many other people waiting in line. So someone told me about, have you thought about the startup space and how you can add value there, whether it's fintech, etc. And I said, oh, that's interesting. So a business that's just started, that's got a P&L, that's got a balance sheet, cash flow, and how I can add value from that perspective. And that's sort of how the conversation started. And not knowing how those conversations were going to go, met the founder, had a really good conversation and said, right, this is the direction I'd love to go. He has a financial background and sort of taken it from there. And I think that is the secret sauce that will lead me to more of these roles. And to your point of, I love the whole fact, even in my current permanent role of joining a business that's really small, seeing it grow, seeing it through various phases. I think for me, just adding to those toolkits of my experience is really important to me. And you mentioned something, Bianca, about that thread of being curious, problem solving, an active listener, and also interested in just the metrics of a business and how it works. I think those are the things that are sort of leading even you on to actually being an executive director. All these things have been sort of adding up, stacking up in Stephen Bartlett talks about filling your buckets because those buckets will help you in the next stage of your life. That's sort of been my experience. We can go on and on, but yeah, that's sort of how I've seen it.
That is exactly it. It is about collecting those experiences. And I always say to people that I work with, people that are coming up in their careers, people in my teams and friends, know your metrics, gather your data points, be very clear on the value that you've added to a company and make sure that they know that value in quantifiable terms. You have to speak the language that a business speaks. When I started out in brand and content, and I see this with a lot of more creative leaning marketers, we do an amazing job. We're brilliant at ideation and adding huge amounts of value to a company. But where we fall short and where I think my career was hitting a bit of a ceiling was that I did not know the business impact that I was having. I didn't know how to read a balance sheet. I didn't understand revenue contribution wise what I was doing. And so my CV had that gap in it. And it can be, if you're a copywriter or you're creating content and you're relatively new in your career and early on, it can be something about open rates on an email campaign. It could be overall revenue growth during that time and the different marketing channels that contributed to it. But know those metrics, get clear on your data points, because when you have those, not only is it easier to get a pay rise internally and get a promotion, but it's easier, perhaps most importantly, to get other jobs at higher levels if you want to progress quickly. Without those data points, it's very difficult to do. And I think when I think about that transition from brand marketer to getting to board level, it has been above all having access to those data points and really knowing my numbers that's made all the difference.
Yeah, being able to measure your impact from
Yeah.
a qualitative and quantitative perspective, isn't it, is really key. How have I impacted this business in my role in the organization? And you see it now in CVs, isn't it? They want a one page of your CV, and it's getting straight to the point of, how have you impacted that organization? In your career, so you're recognized as a thought leader, you've featured in major publications. How do you manage the expectations and pressures, major pressures of being a visible, figure in your industry? And, a thought leader is important, because now, even on the podcast, there will be women looking to the advice, the experiences that you've had. How has that been for you?
It's such a great question. And it's something that I reflect on quite a lot. I think the first thing to say is that none of us have any of the answers. And I'm always reminding myself that I have blind spots. I have things that I don't know. I have things that I really want to learn more about. So my purpose is to share what I've learned in the hope that it helps people even a little bit, maybe reframe something or gives them a new perspective. But I don't come into it ever knowing or thinking that I'm an expert, because I'll die learning. And I kind of like that. I like the fact that I'm a lifelong learner, and I really will leave this earth still with so many questions. And so that's one aspect of it. I know what I know. I also want to keep learning what I don't know. The second part is that there's definitely pressure when it comes to certain topics or things that, marketing is changing all the time and brand is changing all the time. And because it is such an expansive sector, I focus very much on the real life experiences that I've had rather than overall industry commentary, which I could do. And I definitely have lots of opinions. I've got huge opinions on AI, for example, but I'm not an artificial intelligence expert. So, really going back to this is what I learned from this particular experience, and just always going back to my core values. And I think anybody that is putting themselves out there, like you are, it's fantastic, build their personal brand. I think it's really important to start with what are your core values. So for
Yeah.
me, it's integrity, it's authenticity, it's empathy. Those three values are what I go back to in everything I do. So I might not always get it right. I might not know everything, but providing that I'm working with those three values, I feel grounded and rooted in that. So those things have helped me as tools. I think also, as a final point on this, I want to have fun with it. I want to experiment. And I never view thought leadership as me just sharing what I know. It's a conversation. Anything that I put out there, it's to start a conversation. I want to be sat next to the people that I'm speaking with. I'm not talking down to them, so that for me is a really important point.
I totally agree. And that's why, I've really enjoyed this year. One of the goals I'd set for myself was to start the podcast because I wanted it to be a conversation starter, but also an opportunity to give women a voice and be an active listener for them to share their stories. And also attending more, I attend lots of e-commerce events, to understand what's happening in the industry and bring that insight into the conversations I have within the business I work in, to find out, what new tech stacks could help the business be more efficient and support the teams. But also the panel discussions that are happening there, seeing people in the industry speak from their experiences of whether they're working for a big four corporate business or a startup or sustainability. And those conversations where they're being authentic, they're talking about their core values, but also how they've added value to that industry, I think has been really interesting. And, we were at an Albright event where there were these amazing women
Yes.
who are just at the beginning of their careers, but they were talking about their experiences with TikTok. And I think lived experience is valued more because you're talking the talk and walking the walk, as well, which is really important.
Yeah, exactly that. I love that. And that is how we met. And really being in those communities and making sure that there's a balance as well. I never just want to be attending events where I'm speaking. I want to make sure that I'm also listening. And you mentioned active listening earlier. That is another key principle and value for me. And in the conversations that I've had, be it with a one-to-one with a team member or a broader event where there's lots of people, making sure that I am there as a learner always helps me tremendously. And look, I think it's an interesting time in our careers as well. You get to a certain level where, okay, you're now operating at board level, but there's also still so much more to go. There's so much more to do. And so I never want to be passive. And I wonder, actually, I'm curious for you at this stage of your career, how do you view your objectives now that you're not in that early stage, survival mode in many ways, just, building up your experience? Now that it's another phase, it's a new season, if you will. So I wonder, how do you feel about that? And how do you approach it, setting goals for the next 10, 20 years?
That's a really good question. So I've always had like two 5-year plans going concurrently in my life. So one has been the personal one because I'm a single parent. I've raised two amazing boys, 18 and 16. So there was a 5-year plan for that. And that P&L,
Amazing.
I'm still yet to break even. No, I think I've broken even, but not from a financial perspective, Bianca. I've broken
Yeah.
even and made a good contribution in terms of I've raised two amazing boys who have really great core values and ethics. They're hardworking, they're great personalities. So I think that trajectory is there. And then on the career perspective, I'm sort of now looking to step into C-suite. I think that's the direction I'd love my role to go. Building on that board advisory executive career, I think that's the direction I'd love to impart my knowledge and help businesses grow. So I think it's a pivotal point, I think, for me the next few years. So definitely one to watch. But what I've really enjoyed is interacting and engaging with so many amazing women in the industry, in other industries. It's really been comforting to know that there's so many great women out there and great men. I've always, known about great men in business and
Yep.
fashion and e-com. But I think seeing that they're great women, young, whether they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, has been so inspiring and motivating. So I think there's a lot to come. So watch the space, Bianca, of where I'm going. I think there's some great opportunities.
Oh, I am watching this space and cheering you on so much. And I love what you're doing with the Trailblazers as well. I think it's fantastic. I think it's needed. And the more conversations that I have like this, the more I realize we are in a new era of business. We are changing things. And the generation that are coming up, they have a whole new set of values and they are more discerning about the businesses they buy from, the brand values that they embrace and associate themselves with. So I
Mhm.
think that we are in an economic downturn. The world is incredibly difficult with everything that's happening out there right now. And I also see a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope for change and for new ways of working. Something I'm really interested in the business space is the fractional C-suite role.
Yes.
I love this conceptually. I haven't seen it too much in action yet. I do have a few friends and contacts that have started fractional CMO roles, and that's something that's on my mind as well. But yeah, I predict huge amounts of change over the next 10 to 20 years. I think that we are just on the cusp of a new way of doing business.
I think that's true. Really just thinking about learned experience and how do these fractional CEOs or CFOs or COOs add value to a business. I think that's always been there in terms of, if you see people who've been on boards for a very long time, they are coming from that experience as well. But I think it's going to be even more intentional from people bringing
Yeah,
themselves onto boards and organizations.
I
Let's
think
talk
so
about
too.
self-care and work-life balance. So,
Oh,
what makes you tick? How do you prioritize self-care amidst all these amazing things that you've been doing from a professional perspective?
well, the first thing to say is that it's really difficult. And I want to be fully open about that because I think it's a conversation that needs to be had more and more. I personally have arrived at a place where I don't believe in work-life balance. Just numerically, the maths doesn't add up because,
The math
you know,
isn't mathing.
the math isn't mathing. My favorite expression, the math is not mathing. So it doesn't work. So instead, I'm really focused on presence. Wherever I
Mm,
am, I want to be there fully. Where I think things have become more difficult for me is when, for example, I'll be on a vacation, but I'm still reading through all my emails, or I'll be with family, but I'm just going to take a quick work call over there. Wherever I am present. And that has made a huge difference to me, particularly this year. I've had burnout a few times in my career. I've had to navigate that. I've had to take huge amounts of care of myself. You know, I've had alopecia from stress in the past when I was traveling between the US and the UK. I've dealt with acne. I've had lots of small ailments, conditions, if you will, but they've had a big impact on my confidence. So I've had to learn what messages my body is giving me and what version of self-care works best for me. And presence has been a really big one for me. That mental shift from, if I can't have work-life balance, which, you know, I love my work, I love my career, I really love, I'm a person who is fortunate in the sense that I love to work. If I can't have balance, because balance isn't feasible, balance does not add up, let me be present. Let me be fully present. When I'm at work, be at work. When I'm done with work for the day, I am done for the day. And that has been a really helpful shift for me. So I did want to share that because it's relatively recent, but it's been tremendously helpful. In terms of broader self-care, I think having a personal practice of self-compassion and knowing that you're not always going to get it right. But when you do make certain mistakes, or when you feel like, oh, I didn't handle that situation the way that I wanted to, or I was particularly stressed and it resulted in this, or that project I could have done better, creating a dialogue with yourself that says, yes, there are lessons to be taken from it, but look at everything else that you're doing and really talking to yourself. Really, it's a work in progress. The reason that I want to speak so candidly about it is that I really value hearing from other leaders and other people who have had careers that I consider to be very successful. I value hearing that, yes, there's also a lot of struggle alongside that, and we're all just trying to figure it out.
I think it's really great that you're being candid about it because I built my career while I was raising kids. And
Yeah.
like you said, it was about being present. In the evenings,
Yep.
I would finish projects while they were in bed, for example. So wherever you are, being present and listening to your body, I think is a very good one.
Yes.
I know I'm a morning person, so I'm most creative, active in the morning. So a lot of
Yep.
things I do really in the morning. There is no one size fits all work-life balance. It's not linear. It has its ups and downs depending on the phases that you are in your life.
Exactly that. Presence over balance. And yeah, sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. And we have to have that huge amount of compassion and just remind ourselves that we are just all trying the best we can in any given moment. As long as you're taking the lessons from every experience, you can't go wrong.
I totally agree. So Bianca, we're circling back. Where do you see yourself? What does the future hold for you? And then we're going to talk about, Trailblazer takeaway tips. We've had some really
Yeah,
good conversations, but I think there are three or four things that we can really summarize and give the audience some food for thought.
I am really passionate about helping early stage companies. So from everything I've done, and I've really been reflecting actually recently on what is it that I want to do next and what is it that I feel personally the most excited about. And an exercise that I did, I took a week off and I wrote out my entire career story. Each job was a chapter, if you will, and it was just for me. But I did it to almost analyze, where did I feel the most fulfillment? Where was there the most resistance, or where was the most difficulty? And what are the lessons from each of those experiences? And what I landed on is that I love helping businesses launch. Really have a huge amount of respect for the bravery and brilliance that it takes to bring a product, to bring a concept, to bring a business to the world, and to be able to work with founders to help channel the right message, to help really create community around that, to help understand customers. That is a huge passion of mine. So I want to do a lot more of that, both in perhaps a fractional role, full time if it's the right opportunity, or from a board advisory perspective. And then alongside that, so I'm doing a master's at the moment in psychology and neuroscience for mental health. And that has been such a gift. It's been so incredible to understand not only consumer neuroscience more, which is important for my role as a marketing and brand leader, but to understand the teams that I work with more from a mental health perspective, because mental health is a major challenge and conversation that we need to be having more in corporations and in working environments. So continuing that master's part-time. And then the final thing for me looking forward is I really want to use the success that I've had and any resources that I've been able to build and make sure that I'm channeling them back to causes that I really care about. So that part for me, when I think about the bigger picture, is really important. And that's a driving factor for me of everything I've done. And that, if I can really give back in these meaningful ways to these particular causes that align with me, my values, my background, I will leave this earth feeling like I actually did something of meaning.
That is amazing. And considering your initial view, remember at the beginning of your career was to do an MBA. And now you've just circled into something else, isn't it? Love
I
that.
feel some of the experiences I've had have been multiple MBAs. So
Yes.
I'm not going to catch me doing an executive MBA anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, you've actually done it through your contributions and in your work experience for sure.
I mean, I think I've been very fortunate to work with founders who have taught me so much more than I would learn in a classroom. Doesn't mean that I wouldn't do it if I wasn't curious in the future. Never say never, but right now I don't think it's for me at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the work experience and your CV speaks for itself. You've done it 10 times over. That's amazing. Really, really good. And I will be watching the space to see what you do next. Trailblazer takeaway tips, Bianca.
Yes, talk to me.
Share with me what your tips are. So if there were 3 or 4 things to share with the audience that you've learned, I know there are lots of things we've touched on. What would they be?
Number 1, don't be afraid to stand out. If you're the first woman in a certain room, if you're the first person of your background in a company, don't be afraid to stand out. Know that you are a gift to that company, that they need you, they need your perspective, and build your personal brand intentionally. I think, the market is increasingly saturated. Stand out and do it in a way that feels true to who you are. So the second point, definitely know your metrics, know your data points, be audacious in sharing those metrics with the people that matter, whether it's within your organization, whether it's somewhere that you potentially want to join. Know your numbers and be bold about knowing those numbers and promote them, share them, be very confident in your contributions. And the third is to always have your values in place. Your values will change as you change. We go through many versions of ourselves, but always go back to those values. What are my core values? How is this particular opportunity maybe deviating away from them? How can I return to them and use them as a framework for every decision that you make, be it a new job or otherwise? And when you have those, I don't think you can go very wrong.
Awesome. I mean, you are wise beyond your years, Bianca.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for this conversation. You've been so generous with your time, your wisdom. It's such a gift to know you. I'm so glad that we met. And I will be following your career and this podcast very closely. Thank you for creating a community for us to have these conversations.
That is so amazing, Bianca. Thank you. And I think that was the whole idea, to give women a space to just listen to a podcast, listen to someone else's story and be empowered, inspired. So yeah, this has been the Trailblazers Experience Podcast. We are the platform that aims really to bring the stories to life with women in their career journeys. And see you next time.